Welcome to Behind the Teams. I'm your host, Nicole. My career has been defined by a search for what separates good from great and why some teams succeed and others don't. I've looked at this from the court as a professional athlete, through my studies in psychology, and now from the inside of product and design recruitment. On this show, we sit down with leaders across digital, product, and design to understand how they approach leadership. We'll dig into their stories, behaviors, and beliefs about what separates good from great, what defines success, and how they help their teams perform at their best. Let's get started.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. And today I've got Matthias Schreck, or Matty, with me this morning. Hello.
Hello. Good morning, and thanks for having me.
Of course. So happy to have you and really keen to dive into some interesting topics. And hopefully everyone out there will agree with us.
I'm a bit nervous just to be upfront because this is my very first time I'm on a podcast. So, stay with me.
No, you'll be amazing. I know it. But before we dive in, I might throw it to you just to give a quick overview of your career to date in design.
Yeah, sure. So I started my professional career in 2005. I worked at University of Technology in Sydney in a first kind of web something or another job. It doesn't really matter what the title was at that time. And then from there, I went to Telstra for a number of years, then to a small, now forgotten, I guess, website called Cars Guide. And then in 2012, I joined Atlassian, and that was kind of my formative sort of years. At that point, stayed there for 9 years during its hyper growth. And then in 2021, I left Atlassian and joined WiseTech Global as their head of design.
Amazing. So it sounds like a wonderful career to date. You don't look old enough to have done all those things.
I shaved this morning, so I look younger than I am.
You look very fresh. All right, cool. Let's dive in. And I think the first sort of topic that I would love to cover off is getting a better understanding of Matty as a leader. So I know that we've had previous conversations before where you describe yourself as a proud pragmatist. Tell me what that means.
Okay, so I think that no decision is set. I think that's what it comes down to. I think as designers, we often rely on a particular process. And depending on where you are in your maturity curve as a designer, you kind of either absolutely rely on that process or you know how to interpret it. As a proud pragmatist, I'm basically saying whatever decisions need to be made, look at the decision and find the right balance for yourself. Don't just go, my process tells me to go left, therefore I will go left. In some situations, you might have to go right. So it's about making the smart calls to what to use in your process at what time and what not to use. I think that takes a bit of confidence, a bit of maturity in there to sometimes go against the grain. I think where that proud pragmatism often rubs up against the general design community understanding is that for me, design quality as a variable is also negotiable. So a lot of designers say you must not negotiate on the quality. You must always go in with everything you have. And I'm like, that doesn't necessarily have to be true. There are many projects out there where the design quality, whatever that might mean, we can talk about that later, kind of is negotiable. It might be good enough for that particular project, is actually good enough, and then you move on because you need to concentrate on other things.
For sure.
But also, pragmatism means that you make decisions in the face of uncertainty. Like you can't always say, I can't make this decision, I need more research. Like, no, you need to make this decision. You might just be a little bit more uncertain than usual. So let's make that decision and go ahead. That's, I think, what I identify as pragmatism.
Do you feel as though you've always been that way? That's how you've been since the start of your design career, or has that evolved?
So I think in my heart, I have always been that way. But I think in the earlier parts of my career, that was maybe beaten out of me a little bit in a metaphorical way, like no one ever laid hands on me. Yes. So, as you don't have that sort of professional confidence, you're kind of going, well, I'd rather do what other people tell me, or I kind of model myself after how they're behaving. And if they are quite in love with a particular process, you feel this is how you need to do it. And so that pressure from, and I don't mean this in a negative way, that sort of expectational pressure that you get from your seniors, but also that you're getting from the larger UX community, that can be quite decisive in that. And so it takes a while for you to be in situations where like, hey, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense here. And kind of having that confidence to go, I know that people tell me to go left, but I'm now going to go right. it takes a while to get there.
I do think there is, like as a recruiter being in the design community, there is an overarching, I don't know if dominant voice is the correct term, to try and apply like universal principles and a kind of gold standard, for lack of a better term, as to how design should be done. I think that's where some of these things come in, which can be problematic for designers that are growing. So I think sounds as though you're sort of saying, once you get into your organization, be very pragmatic about understanding what's going on around me and what I need to actually do. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, I think understanding what's going on around you and your place in it and what you need to do for the project to be successful, I think that is key. I think there's a lot of disconnect happening in the design community. And once again, when I say design community, I mean like in general, not everybody is like that. But there's a disconnect between making design successful and making the product successful. And I think that's very dangerous, because if it's about making design successful, then you might potentially bet on the wrong horse. Like a particular problem might not be so much about design as you might think. And if that's your standard response and you're not able or willing to make the trade-offs that are better for this project, then you put the entire project or product into trouble.
I've never heard it framed that way, and actually it's a very simplified way of pulling it apart and sort of saying, are you there for the success of project or product, whatever it is, or are you there for the success of the discipline? And maybe sometimes it goes hand in hand, right? Obviously, I think the more success that you can have at a project and product level, design's going to get kind of elevated more as well. Interesting.
Yeah. I think also there's a political context sometimes in some of those companies. If you're in the process of establishing design as a function, as a discipline, then you might say, well, I know that in this particular project, design quality is not that important, but I do want to have it higher than I need to because I want to show other people in the business what can be done. And I completely understand that too. It's more like this entire, regardless of what the situation is, we will always push for top quality. That's when I become that's not pragmatic enough.
What about balancing, if we zoom in closer to team leadership then? Because you might have designers on your team where obviously you need to help them in that project succeed. But what about building up their own craft and maybe understanding that it's not always going to be that way? You might leave this organization and need to apply different thinking or different process.
I think that one of the best things I can teach designers, especially once they're on this kind of verge of becoming senior, is that they understand that everything must be negotiable. I think that's what a product designer needs to be. We are product designers. I think if you're not willing to make a compromise, you're more on the side of being an artist, right? Because you're basically saying, regardless of the limitations, regardless of what makes the most sense, I'm going a different way. And I'm like, good on you, take a paintbrush, take a white canvas and go and start painting. But as a product designer, it's the product process, it's the product success that we're chasing, right? I mean, ultimately also, as simple as that, it's what pays our salaries. If the product is not successful, why I can claim that design quality is it's peaked, then I'm like, yeah, but then how do you get employed? How do you stay employed at this place? Doesn't make sense.
Absolutely. And what about your leadership approach? Or let me frame it this way. Has there been anything about your leadership style or beliefs that have significantly changed over time? If we go back in time, what was your belief about what made a good leader in design, and has that changed now?
That's a good question. I've been a leader now for 12 years, I want to claim, or at least a manager, right? Whether that's the same as leader, I don't know. So there are a number of things I think that I've become aware of. And once again, maybe that kind of coincides with kind of building confidence and you realize you can be your own person. I think the first thing that I was doing and I thought was my job was kind of to enforce a certain level of consistency in the way that work was being done. I mean, that kind of dovetails a little bit with what we said before and about process and relying on a process. I thought that as a leader, the best thing I can do is go, this is the process that the company believes is the right one. Now, how can we apply this rigorously, consistently across the various projects that we're doing? And I mean, as we just discussed, since then, I've come a bit of a way of becoming a pragmatist instead and kind of changing my mind on that. So that was one thing.
And have you seen evidence of success? If you look at your teams, do you feel as though your shift is able to then help them as well?
Depends a little bit on the context. I mean, if you are it also depends on where you are in the hierarchy, right? I'm now head of design. Ultimately, it is up to me to decide what is and isn't successful, right? But for example, when I was over at Atlassian, I was part of the, middle management, upper middle management class of design leadership. And then, of course, my behavior decides how successful my team is being seen to be in the larger community. If the person above you says, we have to have a consistent process, then I don't do a good job if I say, no, I don't want to do it, right? So it depends on the success conditions that the company gives you in which you are a particular type of leader. Does it make sense?
It does make sense. And I think it is, again, about context. And it's still, a really pragmatic way of approaching it. Like sometimes the way that you want to be as a leader, if you're not, depending on where you sit, may not be the best way to achieve the results. So I think you're right, like understanding where you sit within that. And I think from someone that comes from a sporting background, that is also something that's very natural. Like I think even if you move teams in one team, you might have been the captain, you might have a certain way, certain expectations about you. You move to another team, you have to quickly understand, where am I in the hierarchy here? What can I do? And you can still improve individually, but you need to work within that system as well. So I think that makes complete sense.
Yeah. And if I may, I can use this as a segue to my next point.
Yes.
Because I know that you used to be a professional basketball player, right? And my next point is actually that in the earlier parts of my design manager career, I was really trying to model myself on other design managers. And I tried to see I tried to find successful design managers, and then I tried to be the way that they were. And that was a dead end for me, because I was who I was. And so using a basketball analogy, it would be like, you're playing in the NBA, but you're only 5'6". So you can't really maybe be the main guy who does all the slam dunks. It's just not going to work for you. So you need to find your position in the team where the strengths that you bring can have the maximum effect and bring the maximum value. And I think for me, that was a really important part. And that's something that I really only began to understand when I was head of design here at WiseTech and could make my own decisions to a large extent, where I could say, I am this type of person and I act like this, and these are my strengths. And now how do I model myself with those strengths to be successful? And that feels a lot better. There's a lot less anxiety. A lot of my anxiety in previous jobs came from the fact that the system within which I was trying to be successful needed me to be someone else. And I just really struggled with that.
But I don't think that that's a bad way to approach it either, depending on where you are. Again, and if we're talking about leaders specifically, I think early on, sometimes you do need to find people to model your behaviors off when you're still stepping into a new position. Same as in sport. I think everybody has ideal, and you do have to pick, I think, a profile that suits you as well. In the sport context, I wouldn't be modeling my game off LeBron James. It would have to be female point guard, you know what I mean? So then I think you do get to a point though where you can then bring in your own flair and your own kind of creativity to something. But I think it's always good early on to find good models. Yeah.
And just to be clear, like, I'm not saying don't learn from other people, but it's more around, oh, that was interesting. I'm going to do that instead of what I've been doing beforehand. But rather than saying, I want to be like that person, therefore I'm now kind of remodeling my entire self and how I act in particular situation. Like, I feel I am who I am. I'm okay with it, and let's move on.
Exactly. Well, let's shift then a little bit to when you're building teams. What is it that you look for in designers that you think gives you a clue as to how they will perform?
That's a tough one because ultimately, what do I do in my interviews? That are like giveaways, sort of. I mean, first of all, of course, it's when you're hiring or when you're looking for the right designer, you're looking for the right mix. Like, you have a rough idea of what the challenge is that you're hiring that person for. And in my head, I have this sort of shorthand of the double diamond. And then I basically have a conversation with that person to understand, are you more like first diamond or are you second diamond? Are you more like the conceptual thinker? Are you more the UI execution person? Or and usually the answers are not meant to be binary, but rather like, what's your mix of skill that you bring in? And and then I can say, does that fit the role profile that I have in my head or does it not? So that's kind of the first thing. The second thing for me is it's a little bit of I guess, a sign of seniority, but also a sign of, and I want to talk about this a little bit more later, intellectual horsepower. It's a larger understanding of the role of a designer in any particular project. So does the designer actually understand why they're doing what they're doing at any point in time? If I ask them, what's your process? And they basically talk me through a version of their double diamond, then I'm like, yeah, that's nice. But do you know why you are doing research here? Do you know how you're influencing your own decision-making over there? If they can explain that to me in a conceptual way, then I know that I found someone who's special. Most designers just know that the double diamond is right and they follow it step by step. But each one of the steps, they can't really conceptualize why they are doing it at a particular point. And also, I think that also goes along with a maturity that shows that when a designer then executes on a project, that at any point in time, they can kind of look up and go, I know where I am in my process, and therefore I know what I want to do next, or what my options are at least. That's quite important to me.
Completely makes sense. And I definitely do want to dive a bit deeper on that kind of intellectual horsepower point. But going back to your first point, do you have a general approach to building a team where you say, okay, I do want all designers to have a certain ability to kind of move through that double diamond from end to end? Or are you much more, when a role becomes vacant, you're assessing what is it that I need? Like, have you got kind of an overarching vision for teams?
Yeah. Okay. Good point. Yeah. Yes, I do. So, I mean, I'm a big believer in the hub and spoke model in general, right? And by hub, I mean a design system team that usually also fulfills center of design excellence sort of role. And then I have lots of spokes, and these are small design teams that are deeply embedded in the various business units that benefit from the value that design can bring. And so it is a strong indicator what I'm looking for in terms of that sort of skill mix, whether I'm looking for someone for the hub or for someone in the spokes. So that on top of that, each of those spoke mini teams also has to have a certain mix, I would say. For example, in each of the spokes, I need at least one person who is incredibly strong in the first diamond and one person who is incredibly strong in the second diamond. But I don't necessarily need someone who is super strong in both. I rely on those teams to help each other because they're in the same context for a prolonged amount of time. And so they will understand, hey, I'm good at this, I can help you here, if you can maybe help me over there where I'm not that strong. And so I'm trying to get that sort of right ratio in each of the mini teams so that they can look largely after themselves, while if they need absolute specialist help, then they know where to find it.
Like, what about the point about intellectual horsepower then? Do you feel like that's something that you will build over time with experience, or is it something that's more innate?
Okay, so, I mean, for me, intellectual horsepower, maybe I'll just quickly explain that. It's not necessarily IQ, because I don't want to get into a discussion of exactly what that is, not to measure and whether it's, neuroplasticity can get you to a better point or whatever. But it's ultimately this sort of raw ability to understand big connections, even in areas of very high complexity. So I want to be able to throw a designer in an extremely difficult situation that I don't understand myself because I might not have the focus, and they will be able to figure it out themselves. Now, in the current environment that we're working in at WiseTech Global, there are a lot of those areas. Like we're creating enterprise-grade expert tools, and you really have to understand a lot of the subject matter domain, and nothing is simple. So when I put people in there, I need to have the confidence in them that they can figure it out at some point. If I don't have that, then that's not the right person for the job, I think.
How much is speed an element of that?
That's a good point. I think speed is a consequence. If somebody has this sort of large amount of intellectual horsepower, they get to the right thing quicker. And by right thing, it's hard to say once again what we're doing. Is it the best design? No, that's not what I mean, but rather understanding the problem domain. They will get there by looking at this stuff once or twice instead of 5 times or 10 times or never, right? So it's speed, but it's also me being able to rely on them getting there at some point. So that's really important for me.
Do you feel as though creativity, so particularly in designers, if someone comes from a very creative background, how do you think that challenges their intellectual horsepower as a concept if we're looking at someone that can get into high complexity, process quickly, understand, hold that ambiguity, and then with speed, produce an outcome versus someone that might be very creative and want more of a divergent approach to a problem to solve it, go down different kind of rabbit holes for every single opportunity? Do you feel like that's a friction point?
I don't think it's a friction point if you combine those talents in the right way. Because ultimately, what you've just described is once again a little bit like Diamond 1 versus Diamond 2. So in Diamond 1, this sort of intellectual rigor, not so much the horsepower, but the rigor of how do I take a complex problem apart and then apply myself to it. That's an important part of it, but that needs intellectual horsepower. In the second diamond, intellectual horsepower is once again required, but we need different skills to then express it, I think. So if a person is then very creative in that's a different variable. I think people can be very creative under a number of conditions, and people can also be very uncreative. So I'm just saying, just because somebody has a high level of intellectual horsepower doesn't mean that they're creative, and vice versa. So it's a tricky one, but I have seen highly creative people who have a high level of intellectual horsepower do absolutely amazing things.
And for me, hearing it, it's almost as if understanding where to apply those skills, where to maybe, if you can, I don't think you can, but turn off the creativity for a little bit and, use more of that intellectual horsepower to process what the actual issue is. And then once you know, use that creativity to come up with solutions, perhaps.
Yeah. And I want to quickly say maybe a couple more things, if you don't mind, about my argument there. Because there's ultimately, you were asking, is it innate or can it be learned? There can be things that one can do to make it better and things one can do to make it worse, for sure. So there is, there's a variable, it is variable to an extent, I think. So for example, it needs to be matched by a natural drive to understand things, like a natural curiosity. That person can't just be like very intelligent, but then kind of, lazy or not curious. That would not get you where you need to go. And similarly, if somebody is really curious and has a strong drive to understand things, that gets you far. That can get you very, very far. And so there are like things that you can do to get yourself further in that particular thing. There's also a confidence level, I think, in there. I feel that anxiety can really block people in this, like if they have this belief that something can't be done and they maybe can't understand it, that can be really detrimental, regardless of where you sit. And the confidence that you can do it and that you can ask the right questions and understand the answers that even experts are giving you, that will get you really, really far. So that's sort of kind of, I don't know, like this sort of intellectual relaxedness that you need to just kind of soak it all in, knowing that you'll be able to do something constructive with it. I think that's really, really important.
I think that probably comes with a lot of experience as well, though, right? To know that you have confidence in yourself, that you've done it before. Could be completely different context, but you know that you're able to kind of work through whatever that might be.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. Like if I've been in a situation like this before and I don't understand everything right now, but every time I've been in a situation like this before, I did end up understanding everything. That gives you a lot of confidence. Absolutely. For
sure. Amazing. And just to sort of switch to this last part of our conversation, was there anything else that you wanted to add to that point?
No, I'm good.
Great. This last bit here, I'd love to kind of present some maybe established truths that the broader design community might hold, and just get your thoughts on each of them, if you're okay with that.
Sure. All right. That's what gets me into trouble later. I know.
The first one I'd pose to you is the conception that to be a high-performing team or to be a high-performing designer, you have to join an organization where design has been figured out.
Yeah. So I think that was definitely something that at least I became very aware of in like 2012, 13, 14, that sort of area, when a bunch of people in the UX community worldwide said there are companies that do it well and companies that don't do it well. As a designer, you should not work for a company that doesn't do it well. But to me, I find that baffling as an argument. It's like this, it's quite an arrogant position, I find. Like when it comes to you as a professional, I feel you should think about where can I bring a lot of value? Because ultimately, the more value you are being perceived as bringing, the more you should get, maybe paid or be successful in your job and whatever. And so why wouldn't you go into a company that hasn't figured it out yet? Isn't that a much better situation in which you can show the value of it? Now, of course, that comes with a lot more friction. I think sometimes when people say, I want to join a company, that has figured it out, maybe they're looking for a company where there is no friction. And sure, there's nothing wrong with saying that, but I think they should maybe be honest enough with themselves that this is actually what they're looking for. They want to be in an environment where they can design something and there's somebody downstream who just says, oh, thank you, designer, I'm going to implement what you're doing. But if you're going into an environment, where they haven't figured it out, you have to do a lot of pushing. You rub up some people the wrong way. All these sort of things that you need to fight for and so on. But when you then break through and when you achieve results, you have a much bigger impact. So I'm just saying, it is so much more exciting to be designer number 5 or number 10 in a large organization than to be designer number 100 or 200, because your impact would be very small.
If you're in that scenario where you're going to join an organization a bit earlier on, what kind of cues would you look for to know that that impact is eventually possible? It will be a challenge and it will be, potentially a bit of a zigzag, but is there anything that can give you insight into going, well, yeah, I could really have value here if I can get in there and make some change?
I want to be honest, I don't know. I wouldn't know how to look for it. I think it is important that you join a company where you have at least one champion further up in the food chain. There's got to be someone who believes in you, right? Because in those moments where you're trying to push for change, there will be points where you just get frustrated and you need someone who can maybe reframe that frustration or also open a door for you. And if you don't have that, I think then after a while just hitting the same wall with your head, at some point you probably just kind of burn out. But if you have someone who can continuously go, I can do something over here, or maybe there's a better situation over there that allows you to express your energy and the value that you bring in different ways. And at some point something will stick and then the avalanche starts to go down.
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting point you make, actually, that it's also okay not to know. I think you can step into a space and try and fail and still see that as, at least I personally think that that's not a failure in its generic sense. But I do think that there is a lot of pressure. I think maybe because there's a lot of voices out there, sort of saying this is what good design is, this is what good design looks like in an organization. So then it creates a lot of anxiety as a designer if you don't feel as though you're meeting that. When really, I think it's fine. If you get in there and try to kind of work through, help an organization achieve whatever it needs to and solve those problems, if it doesn't quite work out, that's fine.
Yeah, agreed. And there are a number of design maturity scales out there, and they always encourage you to go, oh, where does your company sit? Where does your process sit? And I think, I understand why people put it out there, and sometimes it's just interesting to go through something like that, but I think just blindly following a scale like this and saying, I've got to end up on level 4 out of 4 or level 10 out of 10, that's misguided. I think value as a designer can be brought in a number of ways that might not fit any one particular maturity model. And as we said before, and also it really depends on what your product needs to be successful, that then decides what maturity level actually makes sense for you. Just kind of blindly pushing up doesn't make any sense.
True. And shifting then to the second sort of statement, what is your opinion on designers, and we touched on this earlier in the conversation, having to implement systems? To systemize everything is kind of the best practice for design teams, and especially if you're wanting to scale.
Okay, that's a tough one. So I am, even in the last 6 months, there have been several moments where my team said, we should establish a system for something. And that to me is expressive of the general way that a designer thinks. They understand what the benefits are when a system is in place. because it allows you to make decisions faster because you can rely on the system. If it's a system for your users, it brings consistency and therefore an easier learnability. There are a number of advantages once a system is in place. But I think as a leader, especially, you need to be aware what the costs are of that system as well. Once you put a system into place, innovation gets stifled. Very clear to me. Because you're ultimately saying this system creates your guardrail to the left and your guardrail to the right. In the middle, you're allowed to be innovative. But I am now putting up extra obstacles for you to go outside of the guardrails. Now, of course, some people are not inhibited by that at all. They just say, that's fine, I understand the guardrails, I just go outside. But other people will be motivated to stay within the guardrails. And at the wrong time, that's bad. Especially when you have started to do something new, you don't want to immediately put the guardrails into place. Also because those guardrails might be wrong. Like you might say, we have figured it out, here are the guardrails. And then 6 months in, you're like, oh man, that guardrail on the left was totally wrong. Now need to change it. And then with that, the system changes and everybody's motivations. I guess what I'm trying to say is there is a right time to put a system into place, but it's not at the beginning. So at the beginning, I think as a leader, one needs to resist to do that. Of course, it depends on what you're talking about. But I think in general, you want to have an era of experimentation, and then you want to learn from it. And then you want to work together with your team, and then you put a system into place. And that also then means that once you put it into place, you can't develop a blind spot for your system. You can't just say, oh, sweet, this fits into my system, therefore I'm fine. You do have to regularly kind of look back at the system and going, is this just now good because it complies with my system, or is my system still the best thing that can happen for the entire problem space? And once you're realizing that there is a growing tension between the problem space and the solution it needs and your system, then you need to revisit it. And that can be expensive.
Yeah, well, I was going to say it's sort of one of those things where I guess, again, it will come with experience to know when you need to kind of break that system and what the consequences of doing that are, which to your point, the earlier you put in that system, the less kind of ability that you have to be flexible with it.
But every designer will feel uncomfortable with the fact that they're doing something right now that other people are also doing and there's no system. It is sometimes quite funny to watch it because people will continuously say, we should really establish a system here, or this should really fit into a system. Like, I know, we will come up with a system. It's too early right now. Let's experiment a little bit more. So, and once again, that takes a bit of confidence, I think, to push back against that.
A very kind of current challenge, I guess, and for some organizations, not as current as others, but this kind of AI boom, is that an example of where old systems might have to be broken down to make way for new ways of thinking or new ways of working? What's your sense on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, AI is a large revolution to both our ways of working as designers and to the products that we are designing. And I guess both are asking for a system to be put into place. Right? Like, so how do we change our ways of working to be enhanced with AI in the best possible way all the time? That requires a system at some point. And yet I would say, let's experiment a little bit more, especially because AI itself moves so fast that all the systems you put into place 6 months ago are completely redundant right now because you can do more things or you do them differently, that sort of thing. But then also the same goes for the systems you want to put into place for your user interfaces, for example, in your product. How do you deal with the existence of AI in the user interface? And once again, that acceptance of AI in a UI is changing all the time, right? And as with everything, with every new technology, in the beginning, people are very, what's this? Like, can I trust this? And the answer is probably rather not. So give me lots of stuff in the UI to understand what's going on. Over time, as that technology becomes more and more reliable, you can take these things away more and more. And so any system you put into place now, you've got to be really careful that it doesn't kind of move slower than reality.
That makes complete sense. And I think I could sit here and listen to you talk about that and other topics for forever, but I think we should probably put a pin in it at some point. Maybe we'll get you back to dive a bit deeper on that at some point. But thank you so much, Matty. It's been such an incredible conversation. I've learned so much from this, and hopefully the listeners have as well.
Fantastic. Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
That's it for today's episode of Behind the Teams. If you found value in today's episode, the best way to support the show is to share it with one other leader who's currently building or leading a team. For more insights on the intersection of product design, psychology, and the future of work, let's connect on LinkedIn. I'm Nicole Howe, and this is Behind the Teams. Thanks for listening.